Who is she? Is she one of those aesthetic minimalist YouTubers? No, I just got done painting my house. Hi, I'm Gartes Gartesian, and it's been a minute. I'm talking today about the 5 things that I wish I knew before moving to Armenia. Right now, if you're thinking that house looks like it's in a what? It's in a Soviet Lagan Banakaran, it's because it's not. Right now, I'm filming in my house in Philly. Just for a background, I used to live in Armenia pretty much permanently for about 3 years. I moved there about the beginning of COVID. Up until last year, I lived there pretty much permanently. Now I kind of go back and forth frequently. These are some things that I wish I knew just randomly, that kind of tips, kind of are cultural tips, not really in depth, just on my back on my mind. So let's get into it. 5 things I wish I knew before moving to Armenia. Number one, language. If you're thinking about moving to Armenia and you don't even speak basic Armenian, you're gonna have a hard time adjusting, and you will live in a small English-speaking bubble if you don't speak some level of Armenian. Now that's okay if you're there for like a short time, or if you're just volunteering for a few months. Like if you're like, for example, when I got to Armenia, I first came with Birthright, Debbie High Armenia. Um, but if you're looking to actually start a new life and meet locals, get good deals, barter, you have to know some level of Armenian. Specifically, if you can learn some level of Eastern Armenian, Eastern dialect Armenian, even better. If you know Russian, you can get pretty far. Now, I know there's like this whole like argument, like, oh, we shouldn't speak Russian in Armenia. Why do they speak Russian there? They listen. I'm not one of those purists. I used to be one of those language purists where it was like, no, we're only going to speak clear Armenian, clean Armenian, golden Armenian, book Armenian. And then the longer you live there, you're like, you know what? It is what it is. They speak what they speak. They say what they want to say. And like it or not, Russian is a very widely understood second language in Armenia, much more than English. And if you know even basic Russian, you can get pretty far there. And especially with the older folks, if you're like lost in Armenia, and you speak Russian, talk to an older folk, talk to a papik or a tati, grandma, grandpa, and they could probably help you out. With the younger generation nowadays, they're more English leaning, and some don't speak any second language at all. Like just because it's Armenian doesn't mean they have to speak a second language. But that's kind of the language part. Uh, when I first started learning Armenian, there were no resources. This is a whole other topic, but nowadays there's a couple of more resources online. And if you want suggestions where to learn Armenian, let me know. Number two is rent. Excuse me. Rent is not as cheap as you think in Yerevan. Just because you are in a second world country, whatever it's considered, it is not as cheap as you think. It is cheaper than, like, for example, like living in the States or Europe. But for example, when I was comparing prices to my rent in Yerevan versus some other places in like Eastern Europe or even in mainland Europe, or like like Western Europe, I mean, it's really not that cheap, especially during the COVID times, and then after, like during the Russian invasion and the Russian war in Ukraine. Oh my God, prices for rent got crazy. Nowadays, like before, if you were trying to look for a nice apartment, like under 200K, 200,000 dirham in Yerevan, forget about it. Nowadays, you can find something with a roommate. I think my one buddy, him and his roommate, they split an apartment. I think it's like 150,000 dirham one, and it's a really nice apartment. It's in Kenton, so you can find deals out there, and rent is coming down, but it's not as cheap as you think. Now, the things for food and utilities, they're very affordable, but as far as the base rent, it's not as cheap as you'd think. Number three, public transportation. The metro is great. Everything else sucks. Now, at least the marshrutkas are gone. Okay, back in the day, tell me if you remember the marshutka days. If you used to go to, if you don't know what marshutka is, basically it's like one of those like minivans. Is like the well thing I would call it, but basically marshutka is a Russian word, and they used to have marshutkas, these minivans, as like a big part of transportation in Yerevan, and it was horrible. I'm a little nostalgic, but it was so cramped. You were so hot and so sweaty, and they were cheap, like 100 dirham, but like still they were terrible. Thank God the city has finally, I don't know if they got like funding or like donation, or I don't know where the big buses came from, but I love the big buses. But still, like your main form of public transportation in Yerevan is Honestly, buses, because the metro line is pretty short, and it's clean, it's efficient. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but it hasn't been updated since like 1962 or whatever. So, unless you literally live next or near a metro station, and where your work is or wherever you're going is near a metro station, you're kind of like shut up luck. The buses, like again, I don't know. I really wish the public transportation was better. If your whole life revolves around Kenton, you're fine. But if you have to commute in or out of Kenton, or even going like around the city it sucks. Like it really does suck. And when I first got to Armenia, I didn't have a lot of money. I rode the bus everywhere. I didn't where I had to go for my job. Luckily, it wasn't too far away because I found an apartment near it. But the majority of my transportation was on buses because where I was going, the metro, my work wasn't near the metro, or, maybe if I was visiting a friend, I don't know. But most of my budget for transportation was going to taxis. So that's your taxi budget is going to be a big part of your monthly spend. In America, I almost never take Ubers, I never take taxis, maybe like once in a blue moon. But in Armenia, Gigi's, Yandex, they're really part of your daily life there, much more than anywhere I've ever lived in the world. In on that topic, so the bus system is getting better, but also you want to when you want to travel like around Yerevan, like not just inside of Yerevan but outside of it too. Gigi Shuttle, Yev, and there's also a new app I've heard of. I forget the name of it, but there's like these like shuttle, not public transportation. They're still private companies. Gigi is and Yev are private companies, but basically, if you're trying to get from one city to another, like Yerevan to Vanadzor or to Gyumri or to, depending on what season it is, because they change the shuttles on different times of the year. Sometimes they go to Garni. Those are something you really want to look into, and that'll save you a lot of money instead of taking a private taxi. Like if you take a taxi from like Yerevan to Sevan, oh my God, it's gonna be like 10,000 dirham. I like on the very lowest end I've ever seen for a taxi, if they even go. You know how many times I've had a taxi driver cancel my thing, even though they accepted it, to go to like outside the city? Because it's a whole other story. So, but if you can take a taxi, private taxi, let's say 10,000 dirham from Yerevan to Sevan. If you get a GG shuttle or like one of those other like car sharing things, it can be like 1,500, 2,000 dirham to get to Sevan like one way. So huge savings. Look into those. If you're going to Armenia for a short time, like 1 or 2 weeks, or people are visiting you, just rent a car. Just rent a car. And sometimes, like, I don't know if technically you're allowed to drive in Armenia with an American license. I have before, and like I just kind of like hoped and prayed I didn't get pulled over. I think most police officers, I'm just saying, but like I think most of them will like kind of let it go if you have an American driver's license. But I think by law, they'll accept a Russian driver's license to legally drive in Armenia and a European one. But for Americans, since we use miles and not kilometers, blah blah blah. I don't know technically if it's allowed, but like culturally, I've been told it's acceptable. When I was renting a car once, I asked like, "Hey, like, am I allowed to even rent a car?" And they're like, "What kind of license do you have?" I said, "It's American." They're like, "Yeah." They're like, "Yeah, technically, we're not supposed to," but they like just let it go. But if you're visiting someone for a short time, or you're going to be there for a short time, just rent a car. Like it'll make your life so much easier, especially if you're visiting somewhere like like rural, like villagey, even like to somewhere like Dilijan. Like I would rather just have my own car because getting there easy. Coming back is the hard part. I've been stranded with my friends before where we're like we got to somewhere, like we got to Sevan or we got to Dilijan, great. But then coming home was a disaster. No one would want to. We couldn't get a. No one was on Yandex. No one was on Gigi. There was no shuttles. So we were like literally knocking on doors to get a ride back to Yerevan. I mean, it paid an astronomical amount. I don't know, it was a mess. So if you're going somewhere like a little bit, I think like I don't know. Literally, if you're going anywhere that's not very heavily populated, where you're even questioning whether like to come back, like there's all these like glamping places in Armenia now, like all these like fancy like A-frame like cottages. Cool, but how are you gonna get back? So rent a car if you're going anywhere remote. I just it's worth the money because like, just it's worth it. Oh, you're down for an adventure because like some of the craziest moments I've had in Armenia, like I kid you not, some of the craziest adventures I've had were like just trying to find my way back home. And they're funny now, but during that time, I'm like, hey, the sun's coming down. We're still in Sevan. It's like negative 10 degrees. I want to be home. And we had no ride in sight, so whatever. Okay, number four, traffic in Yerevan. Traffic in Armenia, traffic in Yerevan specifically, is horrendous. It is very car dependent, even though it's a walkable city. And I know this is a conundrum, but like, it's a concept that like you have to like live in Yerevan to like understand. But basically, if you live in Kentron, if you live in Yerevan, it's pretty walkable. Like you can go to any like there's a lot of like pharmacies like on every corner. There's a lot of banks on every corner. There's like butcher shops and there's like there's supermarkets and there's like the little like convenient in English we would call them a convenience store, meterkhanut, those little shops for like basic necessities, vegetable stores and fruit stores like everywhere. But at the same time, it's extremely car dependent. The traffic in Yerevan is really bad. Air pollution is getting, in my opinion, worse. Oh my God, there's like some days where I just feel like I'm like breathing down like the exhaust pipe of a car. And I'm not just complaining it myself. Like even my local friends are like, "Oh my God, this air pollution's terrible." I don't know if the air pollution's coming from factories, from cars. I don't know, but like, dude, the air pollution in Yerevan is it has its highs and lows. There are some fine days, but in general, I would say air pollution is a concern. The noise, Jesus Christ, these honkers. I swear to God, these freaking honkers. If anyone is watching this video in Armenia and your father drives, tell him from Gartes to stop honking. I cannot stand the honking. There was one apartment, I kid you not, I was about to throw freaking rock out my window at the intersection I live near because the honking was non-stop. I don't know if it's a cultural thing. They beep to say speed up. They beep to tell someone to slow down. They beep to say hi. They beep to say goodbye. They beep to turn. They beep to turn on their car and off their car. They beep for hey, I'm gonna pass. Hey, don't pass. Like everything's a beep, and it's obnoxious. And for such a small city, I don't understand. Like, what is the population of Gedam? I don't know, like 2 million, 3 million. I don't know. It's not that big of a city, but the noise to population ratio is crazy to me, and I never really thought before moving to Armenia like, hey, it's gonna, the traffic's gonna be really bad because in my mind I'm thinking like, oh, Armenia, Yerevan, it's gonna be like grape fields and the harvest and mountain, but then you get there and it's like all you hear is like traffic congestion and the beeping and the car culture is just like it's getting crazy. I mean I see it like Armenia, like our GDP is getting up there, our like we're becoming, our middle class is growing, and what's the first thing that people do when they have money? They buy a car. I get it, but to see us going down this path of car dependency, I'm from America. It's not a good path to go down. I really hope that this leads up. But for me, I walk a lot. You can't tell, but I do walk a lot, and the honking, the beeping, and the noise from the cars is drives me absolutely crazy. But like I said, it's a conundrum because also a very walkable city too. So I don't know. Number five, homo, uh, homophobia, homophobic culture, and misogyny. Dude, like it's getting better, but like there is still a homophobic problem in Armenia, and there's still a lot of misogyny. And in general, the country I think is getting better. I think they're opening up to more ideas. I think in general, to be I don't know. I think in general, little by little, I can see the difference in the culture that the society sees homosexuality and queerness and whatever, and also the rights of women, empowering women. It's getting better little by little, but still, if you are like one of those like hardline feminists, or like you're a super like I don't know queer activist, it's gonna be some adjusting in Armenia. And again, like there's no right or wrong culture. There just is culture. So I knew going to Armenia for the first time. It's a conservative country, and I knew growing up, growing up in the Armenian community, even in America, it's pretty conservative. But it was a culture shock to me to like still hear people like younger than me or my age saying like homophobic things and saying misogynistic things. Okay, we all have like that like one uncle at like Thanksgiving that says like something batshit crazy, and you're like, okay, whatever. It's Uncle Hagop. Like just say it, let him say it, and like get over with. But like when people your age say like, whatever in your 20s, early 30s, or even like a teenager, like to hear like someone like say something like really like blatantly homophobic or misogynistic, that's younger, that kind of like that threw me off. And like, I'm not like correcting them. I'm just like, that's how they think. That's what they grew up as. That's their culture. I'm not saying anything, but I will say I think that sometimes it's performative. Sometimes, especially kids and young guys, I feel like they don't actually believe it. They just feel like this is a situation when they should say something like this, and it's a performative act rather than like if they really feel it to be true themselves. That's a hot take, as we know about different. Um, I was seeing the queer community like really excited, and I've been seeing this growing underground, like especially queer, uh, subculture, really flourishing. When I got there, especially during 2021 and 2020, 2021, I was like, holy shit, like how is this even possible in Armenia? But it was kind of short lived because, we saw what happened to Polygraph and The Office, the nightclubs. And even if you're not a partier, even if you don't like to go out, if you don't like raves, but still, it was a huge blow to the queer community. And of course, we were targeted. And of course, this was a planned thing and to um, target minorities. But in general, on this topic, things are getting better. Maybe not as fast as we like, but there are still struggles, and there's something I didn't really know before. Okay, bonus, bonus. Um, this is a random one, but your relationship with your neighbor is very, very important. Whether you're there for a short time or a long time, your relationship with your neighbors, because a lot of us will live not in a sepakantun. Like sepakantuns are like the individual homes, but most cases you're probably gonna end up being in a Soviet style apartment, or maybe not Soviet style, but just an apartment in general where you have a lot of neighbors. And your neighbor can make or break your experience. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're so on the negative side. I would say with neighbors, especially Armenian neighbors, you're going to deal with nosy neighbors. They'll probably ask you a lot of questions about your personal life, the gossip, maybe asking you for more favors than you were expecting, and complaining whenever you open your door. Typical mom, typical aunties or moms, Armenian moms. But on the flip side, that could be great. I've had some great neighbors where they help you out a lot. They give you suggestions. They give you advice. They might even run errands for you. I don't have a child, inshallah, one day. But if I had a child and I had a great neighbor, and they would probably like offer to child for childcare, help watching, babysitting. If you need like 15 minutes to go run to the store and say, hey, can you watch my kid for, or just chit chatting. Like so, your neighbors are really, I don't want to say like the biggest factor, but like if you have good neighbors, don't take it for granted. And I didn't realize, in America growing up, you just like kind of have neighbors. Some are nicer, some are not as great, but like you're just kind of like there. But in Armenia, I realized your relationship with your neighbor is very, very important. You want to introduce yourself, you want to say hello, you want to make small talk, and you don't want to get on their bad side because it does affect your daily life. Some walls are pretty thin, and if you need a favor or whatever, um, some of them are great, but also some of them are not so great. They'll put shit in front of your door, or they'll leave garbage in the stairwell, or they're always like, and some of them like are very sensitive to noise, and they're always complaining. So it really is a big factor. Anyway, these are just some random things that I wish I knew about before moving to Armenia, maybe specifically Yerevan. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And until next time, if you enjoyed this or learned something, do something somewhere. Yeah, take care. Bye.